So let me ask you this, because people listening to this, I'm sure this is either something they are doing or they want to get into or they're interested. What were some of those problems you're having? I'm very interested to hear like what those things you were running into were, because I'm sure people out there are like, ooh, that kind of sounds like me, or I'm getting close to that.
When you're house hacking, you're living under the same roof as your tenants. And so we got to know them. They were our friends. If anything broke down in the unit, they would tell us because we were living in the same space. But when we started investing long distance, we started running into issues that we had never experienced before. And even though we had property management, sort of the boots on the ground there in those locations to take care of the properties, we were coming across things like vandalism, theft. We had to start evicting people. It was gut wrenching. It was really hard to sort of build up that skill of managing those properties, even though we had a property manager in place. And so I'll give you a great example.
Sure.
We had this fourplex in Huntsville.
What's a fourplex? Is that like a home with like 4 spaces?
Exactly. So 4 separate units all under one roof. And so there was one tenant in this fourplex that hadn't been paying the rent for months and months. And as a landlord, I should have
even
actually
tougher now too, as laws have changed.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Anyway, that's neither here nor there. Continue.
Yeah. So they hadn't been paying for months and months, one excuse after another, and I didn't have the heart to throw them out. But eventually, the property manager said, you're actually losing money on this property. We should consider starting the eviction process. So we did. And so the day before the sheriff was set to show up, the property manager calls me and she says, well, I've got good news and bad news. She said, the good news is that tenant left, so we don't have to file the formal eviction. And I said, great. That's great news. What's the bad news? And she said, well, before she left, she stopped up all the tubs and the sinks in her unit. She left the water running and then she took off. And by the time anybody knew what was going on, she had flooded not just her unit, but the unit next door to that and the unit next door to that. So 3 of the 4 units in this fourplex were damaged. And so then we had to, because this was humid Huntsville, Alabama in the summer, we had to let those units dry for several weeks before we could even go in and make the repairs. And so
we just
I
had our
learned
bathroom remodel because we had a terrible leak. And I'm having like Servapro nightmare memories of my house. So anyway, continue.
Yep. And so that whole summer, I spent a lot of time on the phone with not only my property manager, but insurance, various vendors, trying to figure this whole thing out. We had to front the costs of the repairs, tens of thousands of dollars we didn't expect to need to put into the property. And so it taught me that, okay, this whole landlord thing, while it looks good on paper, in reality, things can change at the drop of a hat and cause me a lot more hassle and headaches and time commitments than I was ready for.